Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Episode 2 of On Tilt, the state of Black mental health and policing in America. I'm Julius Boatwright, and I'm here with my amazing co-host, Miss Danielle Brown. Miss Danielle, how you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. Before I got on, I had to do the, wardrobe check and make sure everything was intact. And I'm good.
Good.
Happy to be here.
Yes, ma'am. Good to see you. Good to see you. So we got a lot on deck for today. We talked earlier, and we got a lot of amazing things that we want to talk about. Some things that are, going to be very emotional conversations. So we want to make sure we try to keep things even keel. And before we even get into it, for those of us who don't know, I'm sure the majority of people who are watching should have some idea of what's going on. But if you don't know, Walter Wallace Jr., a Black man in Philadelphia, was experiencing a mental health crisis and tragically lost his life. He was murdered by two police officers. And we want to give a moment of silence for him, for his family, for the ancestors, and for everyone who has lost someone to some sort of senseless tragedy like this. So let's just take a moment of silence to do that. Hmm. All right, everybody. Want to welcome you back. So this, Miss Danielle, the moment that we start this podcast, this unfortunate tragedy happens, and it's not the first. And unfortunately, it's disheartening for me to think about it, and it's frustrating and saddening to know that it won't be the last. But can you talk a little bit about your perspective on the Walter Wallace Jr. situation and what that means to you?
Um, it was extremely emotional to get yet another report of another Black male experiencing a mental health crisis gunned down. And what was so troubling for me was when he was gunned down and his mother was pleading with them not to shoot him. His mother was literally trying to de-escalate the situation. And once again, in our community, we reach out to the police officers, law enforcement, because we still in our, I guess, in our thinking, in our mentality, and thinking that it's safe to reach out to them for help and that they would protect our our men, our daughters, our children, us as a people. And sadly, that didn't happen. And the only thing that keeps going through my head, because when my son, I always share this, I wake up thinking, if only I could catch my son. When he was falling, if only I could catch him. And then I asked myself, what happened? Where were you in that room? So I'm thinking about this mom. And I'm like, she's like, I begged you. I told you don't shoot him. Like she knew that there was a possibility in the way, I guess, whatever they presented to her on the scene, that she started begging them and saying, I called you for help, not to kill him. Help me de-escalate the situation. She made a request. And I
Hmm. Well, Miss Danielle, I'm grateful, and I'm sure so many other people are grateful for your willingness to be a part of these conversations. And one thing we have to speak to, and you're making it more clear to me, is that you're still on your healing journey. You know, we're all grieving the loss, whether it be of somebody that we know, somebody who was near and dear to our family members, or somebody that we don't even know. I woke up this morning and I had read 3 or 4 articles about Walter Wallace Jr. And I was intentionally not watching the video because I've seen too many of those videos, and we all have. You see one, and it is triggering in a way that is unsettling. So here I am doing my research, and I said, you need to watch the video, Julius. You need to be able to intimately really understand what happened and see what transpired in that situation. And so when we talk about de-escalation and crisis intervention, right? Mind you, this was the third call, the third time that they were seeking support for him in that day, in one day. And the third time they get there, and you talk about de-escalation, crisis intervention. In my mind, this is a part of the process that you don't even necessarily need training on, right? This part of the process, I'll highlight this. If you have your gun drawn at somebody, how and you have some people who are arguing for the case of, well, they told him multiple times to just put the knife down. Now that's layered in so many different ways. One, when you're experiencing a mental health crisis of that magnitude, of somebody who has is experiencing severe mental illness, you're trying to communicate with them in a way that is from your perspective, and you're trying to say, well, I gave a logical explanation in that moment. I was clear, and it may not have been received that way because of the depth of the mental health crisis. So there's that component of it. And the other piece, amongst other components, is that if you are in fact trying to de-escalate and get me to calm down, if you have your guns drawn at me, two people, and you're walking around me and you're pointing that gun at me, and you're not taking it down, you're not shifting, you're just so firm in that stance, I'm not going to feel calm in that moment. I'm going to feel threatened. I'm going to fear for my life in that moment. So you can be saying calm down. How am I supposed to calm down with your gun pointed at me? Two of them. And all of the people around me screaming and yelling. That even the most zen person would have difficulty being calm in that kind of situation. So it makes me, I have to take a deep breath because it makes me really emotional thinking about it. I cried after I watched the video this morning, and I had to ask myself, where are these tears coming from? What triggered the tears? If you are having a mental health crisis and that's not enough to be able to have your life honored and saved, then what is? And no one's really talking about the fact that, let's create this scenario. If Walter Wallace Jr. was a 27-year-old white man,
say something about that, Julius. Go ahead.
and this was in the suburban area of Philadelphia, and every spectator was white.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying, I'm just gonna leave it at that. How does that situation unfold then?
Crazy how we on the same wavelength. I was thinking the same thing. How many times has it been posted where we see the exact thing happen in our white America and our white communities, where all of a sudden, magically, the police knows how to appropriately disarm or de-escalate a person who's having a weapon, a knife, guns, pose. And the difference is these people are actually coming after the police. And they seem to somehow magically know how to put in place CIT, crisis intervention. I mean, it blows my mind. So it makes me think, is it that the officers really don't know? Or when they see us, they already painted us as being these aggressive, untainable, maybe animals. I don't know what do you see when you see us? And why is our mental health crisis any different than that of a white person who's having the same mental health crisis, but a little bit more aggressive, because not only are they having a mental health crisis, but they're using their weapons and coming after and pursuing the officers. You see the officers running and scrambling. But with us, clearly the mother is de-escalating the situation or attempting to. And you just fire? Like immediately you're thinking gun? Where's the taser? Where's the baton? Where's the talking and the calm? I mean, where are all the other parts and pieces to a crisis intervention mechanism being put in place that all of a sudden he got a knife? He didn't put it down because he's having a crisis moment, so we shoot him. And that's our answer. I don't understand. I don't. Around the world, we saw one in Britain where there was clearly a crisis going on, and he was clearly very aggressive, very couldn't be made calm at all. And what happened? They were able to disarm this man. We see it play out on social media. We see it all the time. But what is going on that they feel so threatened by us that the only way to deal with us is to kill us? I'm sick of it.
I read a bunch of articles. I read maybe a dozen different articles from all the different major media outlets, national outlets. And there was one in one of the articles, they were asking, I can't remember which sergeant or elected official, they were talking to someone and they were talking about the budget and why these officers didn't have tasers or stun guns. And they were saying it's not in the budget. We don't have the funding for it. Well, you got funding for firearms.
Right.
You got an infinite amount of money to send somebody out with a gun with a full clip and maybe extra. I'm assuming extra. So to me, that just sounds like, you know, not to try to have a play on words or anything like that, but a cop out. It sounds like a false narrative to try to protect power and influence. And hey, Miss Danielle, I'm getting a little bit of an echo. Would you be able to, maybe we can just mute if the other person's talking so we stay on track. So it's you know, it was one of those things when I was doing that research, I'm like, what do you mean you don't have funding for it? You have funding for all these other, for new cruisers, for training, for all these other things that you want to put out into your force, but you don't have funding for tasers or stun guns. And that was just unbelievable for me to even think that that's a reality and that's a real thing. And the second piece I want to mention is that the in addition to the stun guns and the tasers, the lawyer who was representing the family said that if you come to my house, you're a repairman or a repair person, and you come and you only bring one tool to fix my washing machine or to fix my refrigerator, you only have one tool. I'm going to ask you, why did you come here with only one tool? If you're a trained professional or in your skilled trades person and you come to fix something in my house and you only have one tool, I'm not letting you touch anything in my place because you only brought a hammer. You brought a hammer to fix my faucet. You brought a hammer to fix this. It's the same way with the police. Your gun is not the only tool. In fact, what would it look like for them not to show up with a gun? And Miss Danielle, do you want to come off mute now?
Julius, it was never about, I agree. I think one of the comments that I was reading, they said the knife wasn't the threat. I agree. The knife wasn't the threat. It wasn't even about that. The mother had already contacted them. How many times? Three times. They knew the situation they were going into. They had foreknowledge to choose the right method and choose the right tool to use at the situation. They had the mother who had a wealth of information about their child at their disposal, and they ignored it. So it really wasn't never about, I agree. I think that's Carrie who said that, Jasmine Smith. I agree with Jasmine Smith. The knife wasn't the threat. We are the threat. This is the threat. And how do we get that point across? That we're not a threat and that our lives matter. Walter's life mattered. His mother's life mattered. Because see, when you took Walter out, you took out his mother. And you took out a whole community that now has to find a way to survive in this harsh life without our loved ones, because they could be here and they was unnecessarily taken, unjustly taken, innocently taken. All because it is. We're allowed to have a mental health crisis, aren't we? Aren't we allowed to have a mental health crisis? You live long enough, all of us will have a mental health crisis.
And there were so many people around in this situation. This is another thing that you and I talked about, that it's not just, right? It wasn't just Walter and these two police officers. It was Walter, his mom, the family members, the neighbors, the people in the car, all of these different dynamics, that are unfolding in this moment. Everything is playing a part in that situation. So one of the things I want to bring into this conversation is us as community members. When we are in these situations, we also have to be thinking about how are we either contributing or taking away from the moment, meaning the energy that we're giving, are we helping to de-escalate it? Are we grounded ourselves, or are we escalated to a point where we're in fight, flight, or freeze, or we're being responsive in a way that is not supporting the de-escalation of the situation, and being mindful of what that means and what that looks like, knowing that it's hard, it's easier said than done. Because when you're in that moment, you're probably not thinking straight and able to gather your thoughts in a clear, succinct way that makes sense. So just to be mindful of when we're in these situations, if we're a family member, if we're a neighbor, if we're an onlooker, how are we engaging with law enforcement when they show up? How are we trying to engage with the loved one or family member who's experiencing the crisis, and just really being mindful and thoughtful and intentional about that, because what we do will also influence that situation. And these officers that come in that are already on tilt, they're already on edge, they're already aggressive, and they already are coming in with their license to kill.
Right.
Is so tragic and unfortunate. Now we, as the people that they're supposed to be protecting and serving, we now have to figure out a way to do their job for them. We now have to become the crisis intervention responders to say, okay, how are we going to calm this officer down? Because you know that you know the officer is coming in with aggression, with fear, and with mistrust, and with anger, and in some cases with some hatred, probably in most cases.
Systematic racism.
And no one, again, no one's really talking about that in this situation, that they may not even be looking at Walter and thinking, this is my fellow brethren and is in need of some help.
Right.
If I'm going in and I'm thinking like that, I'm not having my gun drawn.
No.
I'm not. And then I have to continue to breathe, because
It's heavy. Deep.
it's maddening. And okay, whatever fraternal order, police, or whoever wants to talk about procedures, or there was also a quote that I don't memorize their names. So someone said on law enforcement, they were doing their jobs. They protected the community. I'm paraphrasing that they were. Yeah, you got to drink something after that. So okay, you can't fire off. Let me take a step back. They shot to kill. They shot to kill. It wasn't okay. This young man was a physical threat to the people around him, so we shot him in the calf muscle, shot him in the forearm. No, you don't want to shoot him, period, at all. Zero. Don't even bring the gun. It's at that point where you do have the gun drawn. How do you go from trying to de-escalate with your weapon drawn to firing off enough rounds to kill a village of people and a whole block of people?
I mean, I'm saying, Julius, that alone. I mean, the rounds. I think it. I mean, I don't know. I heard different accounts, but I think the last I heard was 10. Come on. They're acting like we're at war, and we're taking down multiple enemies. This is a man in crisis with his family members nearby. And you know what's disheartening? What's disheartening is when the police tells the mother to step back, to move away from your child. I told y'all this was going to be very emotional for me. But what gives you the right to tell that mother to move away from her child when she's trying to help her child in that moment? Her child wasn't a threat to her. Who's the child a threat to? He might have been a threat just to himself. Ooh, we have to take several breaths.
Yeah, take your time. Take your time. Let's take a couple deep breaths. So someone put in the comments, Carrie Joe Green. Could there be a benefit in a rapid response group? Of, could there be a benefit in a rapid response group of white people with mental health training who are willing and able to show up first and put their bodies between the Black folks in crisis and cops?
You know, I read her comment, and actually, I was going to say something to it because when we are marching in the streets, a lot of times we ask for, the white people to be on the outside and to be a barrier in case something goes down. We get retaliation from the police officers. And so, I thought about the comment she just made, and I was like, let's just, you always mention this, Julius, you talk about reimagine, right? Let's reimagine Walter's situation. And let's just say the first call that the mom put out, that a group of white people did, show up at the scene and put a barrier between the police officers and Walter and that family. I wonder, would the police officers be trigger happy, worried about the white people who are who are serving as a barrier between the officer and the family? Because obviously, if the officer fired, the officer's claim is they felt threatened. Why else would you fire? You feel threatened, right? So if the white people were there and they were barriers, would you have fired because you thought that Walter was going to threaten the white people? And you would have fired through the white people at Walter? How would this have been reimagined? How would this have played out? And I don't think Carrie is off point here. I think she's right on point. How about that?
There are so many. This is one of the challenges with this, and this is Carrie, a perfect segue for us into talking about crisis intervention training and what that looks like. It's not a new concept. It's something that has been happening across the nation, and it looks differently depending upon resources, depending upon the values of that police force or the values of the mental health agencies and behavioral health organizations within that city or that region and that state. And so it looks differently in different cases. And to start on a local level, we had a chance to look at that article that came out that was talking about what's happening here in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, talking about the reimagining of behavioral health in law enforcement and policing, and how those two overlap and can overlap and intersect to not let something like this happen, right? In our backyard. And Philly ain't that far away, so that may as well be in our backyard anyway. So I read the article that came out from Public Source, and in fact, I know a number of the people who are on the 29 person task force. And one of the main things that jumps out to me is in that article, right? Jasiri from One Hood said, and I'm paraphrasing, if we're not invited to the table, that's okay. We'll just build our own table, right? He made reference to that. And what that means to me is I'm thinking about all of the people in the community who have such rich lived experiences, who have been de-escalating situations for as far back as they can remember.
Absolutely.
Crisis situations that are not necessarily at a point of crisis. They have been leaning on each other and their neighbors and their family members and other trusted mental health professionals to de-escalate some of these situations that don't turn into crisis. So we don't hear about them. We don't hear about the hundreds and thousands of situations that everyday people de-escalate.
Your pastors, churches, church organizations, they have been very active in the community and de-escalation as well.
Absolutely. And when we're having these conversations about reimagining what something looks like at a systems level, the grassroots people, the everyday people in the trenches that are there in their communities, they're part of that overall system. So if we have these conversations without them, then the conversations are incomplete. You, the, the most rich resource are the people who are on the ground when this happens, who are living with the most rich resource is Miss Danielle Brown, is Walter Wallace Jr.'s mother, his family, his neighbors. Those, ask them, what should crisis intervention look like? And understanding that everybody's going to have their ideas. We're all going to have tons of ideas, right? That's the nature of it. But if we're not a part of the brainstorming in the process and the reimagining of it, if we just get the final product, what are your thoughts on that, Miss Danielle?
So many. I mean, I'm thinking about, why is it that white America is trying to solve our problems when they are the culprit of our problems? You know, and I take my situation. Jasiri said we'll build our own table. I've been asking for a seat at the table, even in my situation, and I'm consistently being ignored. And so the question is, from an investigative standpoint, what is really the issue here? And why aren't you in the community asking the community? Why aren't you at that family member's house that knows that person, that neighbor that knows that person? Because, see, let me tell you, most people that get to the level where the police is responding, 9 times out of 10 is not the first time. And that person is already known in the community and to that police who manages that beat. They know who that person is. The neighbor knows. You know, we are beyond keeping secrets. You know, even growing up, we would say so and so, yeah. We might use demeaning terms like they crazy, but we knew who they were. So, you know, again, why are we trying to solve a problem with members who have no clue? Why are they consistently coming up with these programs and they're so out of touch? Because they're not in the community. They're not in the situation. In time, I would have asked Walter's mom, come and have a seat at the table. Not right now. But you better believe people like Walter's mom, people like me, and other people who have nurtured, raised, and been a part of the crisis intervention that hasn't even escalated to where police had to respond, had to de-escalate in their own home numerous times. And the fact that they lost their child, not because of de-escalation, but because of fear. When those police officers showed up and they could care less, they saw a knife. That was an open invitation for them to use strong force. Or they saw a gun and it was like, open invitation. There's a gun. Our training says if we see a gun, we can shoot. Ask questions later. Why aren't those people at the table? There's enough of us. That's why you hear me champion behind mothers. And I say I hear their tears. I hear their tears. Why aren't they at the seat at the table? They de-escalated their child all their child's life. These are the people we need to be talking to.
And let me be clear. There are folks who are part of these working groups who do the work day in and day out, and who I know have risked their lives. They've risked their livelihoods to support Black and brown people, to support justice, to uphold fairness, and to just be there for people. So I want to be clear and acknowledge those folks, that it's not that these groups are always made up of all of people who just don't care or who are disconnected. The great majority of the time, it doesn't resonate with everyday people who are on the ground and who have that lived experience and can share it in a way. It may not fall in line with a clear-cut process. All right, we got to do phase 1, we got to do phase 2. It might be a little complex, a little nuanced, and a little complicated. But what do we expect from people who are constantly hurting? So I'm in a constant state of hypervigilance and anxiety. So when I even get an invitation to come to the table, it's difficult for me to even show up. You want me to be in a calm, meditative, Zen-like state when everything around me is forcing me to be hypervigilant and anxious and on edge. So that reimagining is there's so much to that.
Yeah.
And I want to kind of revisit Carrie's point, but from a different perspective. I'm sorry. It's so heavy. It's so heavy. Because I just thought about, okay, the work that we do, we work with Black people in the communities and train them up to get these skills to be able to eventually go into situations like these. And they could come in with all the training certificates, years of education, Zen, therapy, all of it, and still get gunned down, and still get killed.
Pretty
right along with the Black and brown social workers and the Black and brown psychiatrists and the Black and brown mental health professional. So I think crisis intervention training is a part of it. It's not all of it. We're talking about hate, power, and fear
And control.
and control in the thought of having that power and that control taken away from me makes me fear. We're talking about stuff, it's beyond funding, it's beyond 8, 10, 12, 57 hours of training. It is beyond that. We're talking about I hate you or I'm afraid of you because you are different. You appear to be different from me.
But it goes back to my point on our last segment, on our last episode. How are these officers trained? Because it's just not white officers. It's also our brown officers that are doing this to us. So what behavior is that? And I was in law enforcement. And I know why I got out of law enforcement. Because the system was so unbalanced. It was so blatant. And I didn't want to be a part of sending, at the time, Black men to jail while I'm at the same time I'm listening to the judge saying to, our white offenders, oh, we'll put you in a, rehabilitation program. We'll send you to a drug program, or we'll put you on home arrest. But they weren't doing time. That was not an option for them for the same crime. So I don't understand when an officer that is from a African American community, a African American race, when he sees another Black person in crisis, what is going through your head? Like, why didn't you make yourself a barrier with your partners and say, wait a minute, I'm familiar with this. He's having a mental health crisis. Let's get on the phone and see how he's not coming towards us. Let's get on the phone and see how we can resolve this. Anyone got a taser? Bring the taser. Let's strategically see how we can, disarm him. Like, where with those conversations? Are we privy to that?
I have, as you were talking, I started to think about a disease, and at the cellular level, whenever you have, I'm no epidemiologist or public health expert, so if there are any folks in the chat or who watch this who want to give that more clinical perspective on this, please do. I'm trying to connect some dots here. You have a disease in your body and you've got bad cells. It's going to be difficult for the healthy cells to survive. To survive, thrive, to grow, and to just sustain life in your body and help you sustain life. So I give that analogy because I imagine that when we talk about a disease, racism is the disease. White supremacy is the disease. Systematic and systemic oppression, they are the diseases. And when we have the good cells, the you use your air quotes, right? The good cops, just even the energy or the environment of being surrounded by the disease, it can become overwhelming to the point where it renders you unable to even do anything, or to even or to know that something needs to be done, but to be fearful, worried about all these other things, that that the system, that the oppression, that racism, that all these things have deeply embedded into my brain and into my soul, to the point where my actions are not even my own, because I'm so I'm I've become an organ. Now the bad cells have morphed with me. I, I, I'm still trying to be a good cell, but I'm being swallowed up into these cancerous cells, and it's almost impossible for me
Yeah.
to rejuvenate, and to resuscitate, and to bring life or calmness or any of those things into that situation. So I think what the point I want to illuminate in saying all of this is that even the Black and brown police officers, law enforcement representatives, they are victims. They are victims. I've met Black and brown folks in law enforcement and as police officers, and their hearts and their souls are in the right place, and they genuinely care about the community and their constituents, and they genuinely care about upholding justice and fairness, and that still doesn't make them they're still subject to what happens within the system. So please chime in.
I'm not going to give them that much credit. Victims, it's enough of them to be able to make a difference. It's enough of them to make noise from the inside that we will be able to hear on the outside that something is wrong, and that they too will not tolerate it. We have seen police chiefs leave positions. I think the one in Atlanta left the position. I forgot where else, because they could not tolerate what was being done behind closed doors that translated to affecting us on the other side. Now, it would be nice if they left these positions and they were more outspoken about their why in leaving the position. Because what happens is they go silent, almost like a code of ethic, a code of silence. They don't really speak on it. And they're in the best position to speak on it, to help us understand. What conversations are you all having about Walter Wallace in your briefings? When you guys get together for, I think they used to call it, I forgot what we used to call it, morning briefs. You know, what type of conversations are you all talking about? Are you all talking about how other options could have been used to keep him safe? You know, why did you leave that position? What was going on systematic in those systems that made you leave that position? And then what are you doing about it on the other side? How are you helping us to protect ourselves, to change laws, to re-educate the very people that served underneath you? They had power. I'm not going to let them off the hook that easy. You know, we're out here protesting. We're out here marching. We're out here putting our lives in danger. They're in uniform. Last I checked, police officers were not getting killed for speaking up. So why aren't they using their privilege, their badge and uniform privilege, to take a stance on the inside and be transparent about it to the outside, so we can be on one accord and we can feel like at the very least they're advocating, someone's advocating, or someone's saying, wait a minute, this is not right. Like I don't hear enough of that. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're transitioning us right into a call to action. So we want to transition into the final minutes of the show. I'm not going to say that was your call to action, but it sounded like it could be. Do you have what is your call to action for the viewers or anybody who might see this?
If you know a police officer, ask them, what are your meetings are about? When you see this, if you know a Black and brown police officer, ask them how they feel about what's going on. What type of conversations are they having in their news brief? Because it's not top secret. They don't even have a top secret clearance. I'm here because I have one. And police officers do not have a top secret clearance. So it's not top secret information. But ask them. And then ask them, how outspoken are you? What are you doing in your small capacity? What are you doing to bring about change when you're not in uniform? Are you exercising your First Amendment rights? Are you out there marching? You know, are you vocal? That's my call to action. Start asking these people, these police officers, you know, and I don't think, no, I'm not saying all police officers are bad. I'm just saying, ask what they're doing. Because I want to know. I want to know how this is affecting them and what they're doing about it from the inside.
Thank you for that. So my call to action to everybody watching, it has a few components to it. So one, there's something that's called a warm line, and not a lot of people know about it. There are even a number of mental health professionals who don't know that this exists. So a warm line is a number that you can call when it's not to a point of a crisis. So it may be a situation or a scenario that has not escalated to being dangerous or to being at the point of crisis. You can contact the warm line. They have them in multiple states. It's not in every state, but they do have warm lines available in, I would say, maybe half of the states around the country. They have trained peers. So most of the time it's people from the community who have lived experiences, who have their own mental health journey and story, and are there to be empathetic and compassionate and listen to folks. We do have warm lines here in Pennsylvania. Again, they are in other states. So just do a little bit of research on warm lines and see if that might be. It looks like Carrie Jo Green just put it in the chat there. Mental Health America National has a resource for warm lines. So check that link. Second thing, Lay people in the community get as much mental health training and education as you possibly can. You don't have to be able to diagnose someone. You don't have to be able to, you actually shouldn't be trying to serve as the mental health professional. If you get that training and that education, those additional skills, you have more tools at your disposal to be able to provide support. When you think about the spectrum of crisis, right? So if we think about the Walter Wallace situation, what we saw was a snapshot. We saw the end of that spectrum, but there was more that happened on that spectrum that no one will ever know. We'll get secondhand, third hand, fourth hand recounts of what happened and what was said. But there were dozens of things, hundreds of things, thousands of things that happened that led to that moment in time. So we can get, not if, get the skills, the training, get in therapy yourself so that you can also de-escalate yourself. Absolutely. When you're involved in those moments and you're involved with other people who are experiencing crisis.
Absolutely.
Right? We can't help others heal if we're not healed. And Miss Danielle, I want to give you a chance if you have some final thoughts before we transition out. Do you have any final words you want to give to the people?
Just remember to breathe. Meditate and breathe, because this is hard. You know, we're a people of traumatic experiences that is happening around us, and it's happening way too frequently. So we have to just pause and check in with ourselves and breathe, because I don't see it letting up anytime soon, Julius. We're going to have to take care of ourselves as we fight and continue to push for changes. We've got to learn to take care of ourselves and breathe. I'm breathing right now. I had to breathe several times in this segment because it's hard.
We have about 1 minute left. Let's breathe with the people. Thank you, guys. We love you. We appreciate you. Take care of yourselves. Be there for your people. We'll see you guys next week. Peace, everybody.